So, a while back, I made a video on comic book characters that should have stayed dead but were unfortunately dragged up once again to do battle, and I made the point that death is a powerful writing tool that is completely undone if you decide to have these characters rise from the grave. It doesn't always ruin things, as you might get some amazing runs out of it, but it definitely takes away some of the impact. However, there are some characters who have remained 6 feet deep for good and stand as a monument to this thinking. Death is horrible, but sometimes it's necessary. So let's take a look at some of the best, or should I say the worst, moments of comic book characters' lives together. I'm Jules, this is What Culture, and these are 9 comic book deaths that haven't been undone yet. Number 9. Goliath. In Mark Millar's Civil War comics, there needed to be a real stake to convince people that the conflict between the established superheroes was truly dangerous. To achieve this, Miller decided to kill off Bill Foster, aka the ginormous superhero Goliath / Black Goliath. A rogue clone of Thor named Ragnarok struck Goliath down during a massive superpowered battle, but not before Goliath ironically managed to fire off the line, "Get ready for the shortest comeback in history, Thor," and Ragnarok responding with, "I don't think so," before shooting a bolt of lightning right through his hoofing chest. A funeral was held and Bill's nephew Tom Foster later took up the mantle of Black Goliath, but importantly, Bill stayed dead, hammering home the fact that the superhero Civil War was a no-nonsense clash of heroes and ideologies where lives were actually at stake for a change. Number 8. JorEl and Lara Lorvan. Some characters are invented with the express purpose of dying and supplying an origin story for more important characters. Superman's parents, JorEl and Lara, firmly fit into this category. JorEl was the scientist who predicted the demise of Krypton, and Lara was his wife. Together, they sent their infant son away so that he would survive the destruction of his homeworld. Notably, they've never risen from the dead, and Superman has never found a way to save them. Now, they have cropped up in wobbly timeline stories and multiple flashbacks over the years, but nothing more than that. The fact that these two must fall for the iconic hero Superman to rise is too large a part of the Man of Steel's mythology for the writers to ever truly bring them back. That'd be nothing but a disservice to the big blue boy scout, wouldn't it? Number 7. AntMan. S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Eric O'Grady was one of the least likable superheroes ever, even using his stolen Ant-Man suit's shrinking powers to stalk women. Charming stuff, right? From time to time, though, he did help save the world, and Eric did eventually get a chance to make amends for his crimes when Steve Rogers overlooked his years of criminality and invited him to join the Secret Avengers. It was as a member of this team that Eric eventually met his end. He was beaten to death by a group of androids that worked for a supervillain team called the Descendants. He had one final moment of redemption at least, though, as he fought off the robots long enough for a young child to escape. And that child was Ewan! Plot twist! Nah, not really. Although the Avengers thought that Eric had survived for a time because the Descendants sent back a robot decoy in his place, Eric's death was never in question for the audience. The fact that he died at the end of his redemptive arc is rather fitting for the character too, so it's probably for the best that he hasn't been revived. Number 6. Howard and Maria Stark. Here are some more parents that had to die to fit into the origin story of a more important character. Howard Stark, father to Iron Man himself, was killed in a traffic collision along with Tony's mother Maria. Although it's been suggested that their demise wasn't accidental, the comics have never really deeply delved too much into the details of Tony's parents' death. The writers seem to prefer leaving it open to interpretation, which adds a nice air of mystery to Tony's backstory. Regardless, their passing makes Tony a billionaire orphan who's forced to take up leadership of Stark Industries much earlier than he would have done otherwise. It's very Batman in the way it reads, but it's totally Iron Man in the way that he begins to divert and become the anarchic genius industrialist that we've all grown to love. His parents have also returned in alternative dimensions, but there's no real chance they'll be brought back to life as, in the most matter-of-fact terms, he's become his own man without them and would actually harm his image if they did. Number 5. The Ancient One. The Ancient One was Earth's Sorcerer Supreme before Doctor Strange took up the mantle. They taught both Stephen Strange and his nemesis Baron Mordo in the ways of the mystic arts, and years later, the Ancient One was unfortunately killed. This transpired because an extra-dimensional demon called Shuma-Gorath had kidnapped the Ancient One and wanted to force them into serving as a gateway to allow it passage to Earth. Knowing the terror this would cause, the Ancient One ordered Doctor Strange to kill them and thwart Shuma-Gorath's plan. The death of the mentor figure is an archetype of storytelling, so it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, but it was still powerful nonetheless. If anything, it actually was more shocking that it took Marvel a period of several years to get around to killing the Ancient One after Strange's training was complete. However, as you'd expect from being so closely tied to magic, the Ancient One has popped up time and time again as a spirit, but has never really returned fully from the grave completely, which is why they make the list. Number 4. Captain Marvel. For years, Marvel have managed to keep Mar-Vell deceased, which is pretty impressive by modern standards. Prior to this, though, there was a time that he would have comfortably topped this list, when the cosmic hero, the original Captain Marvel no less, first died of cancer back in 1982, which is a decision that stuck for a very long time. With only a couple of ghostly cameos in the interim years, he didn't properly return until the huge crossover event Chaos War back in 2010, and even then it was only a very brief cheating of death. Later, in 2012, Mar-Vell had one final chance to cling on to life when a crystal was used to keep his cancer at bay. However, after realizing that this powerful crystal was endangering the lives of his fellow Kree, Mar-Vell heroically sacrificed his last lease of life in order to save others. From there, though, it doesn't look like he'll ever return. Number 3. Thomas and Martha Wayne. Thomas and Martha Wayne are intrinsic to Batman's story. If they hadn't been gunned down in Crime Alley by the mugger Joe Chill, Bruce Wayne probably wouldn't have become a vigilante at all. It's understandable then that their deaths haven't ever been undone within the main DC Comics continuity. There was one big notable what-if story in 2011 when his dad took up the mantle of Batman and his mother bizarrely took up the mantle of the Joker, and there was a moment in which the Lazarus Pit was going to be used to bring them back as zombies, but apart from that, there's been zero chance of them coming back. I mean, if they're alive, Batman just isn't Batman, right? Number 2. Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy, aka Peter Parker's first true love, died in the comics in 1973. It was a hugely shocking moment for fans and a large part of Peter's personal development. When the Green Goblin threw Gwen off of a bridge, Peter tried to catch her leg with his web. In doing so, he gave her whiplash and accidentally killed her. Awkward. This accident haunted him for years. As this event was so tragic to Peter, it's important that the comics don't go back on it, and so far, they never have. Now, the writers have given us Gwen's secret children, clones of Gwen, and even an alt-universe Gwen who became Spider-Woman, but have never reincarnated Gwen from the main timeline. If they ever did bring her back for real, the fan backlash would likely be intense. It's still referenced quite a lot, and whenever Peter meets an alt-Gwen-like person, he tends to be hugely protective of them, which is understandable. Nods like this from the writers are far preferable than a resurrected Gwen. I'm sure we can all agree on that. And number 1, Uncle Ben. And finally, there could only ever be one winner, right? Where Bucky and Jason Todd have flaked, Uncle Ben has stood firm. Firmly underground, that is. Peter Parker's adopted father is the cornerstone of Spidey's heroic development. As the man that taught him about power and responsibility, no one has played a bigger part in turning Peter into Spider-Man. Uncle Ben's death is tragic, and it forced the young Spidey to buck up his ideas. He couldn't just use his power for money or fame anymore, he had to do something good with them. And he did, never forgetting what Ben taught him. As with all the significant comic book characters that die, there have been plenty of echoes and references back to Uncle Ben over the years. Just recently, an alternate version of Ben showed up, but he was a cowardly Spider-Man from another universe that needed reminding of the responsibility that came with power. Once, Peter got 5 minutes to talk to Ben's ghost. It was touching, and it didn't overstay its welcome, but this is about as much as fans could handle. Rare nuggets of alt-Ben action could be interesting, but nobody wants to see the original version of the character come back in any major way. After all, if this list proves anything, it's that some characters can be far more effective in death than in survival. And so that's the end of our list, and yes, you might have realised that there's no mention of mums and one per lists. Well, my friend, that's because of the fact that there have been enough parents that have bit the big one already, so I don't need to talk about how your mum bit my big one last night. Oh, I guess I just did. Well, there's my one per list. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know what you'd like to see me cover next in my crazy, weird web that I live in. I actually do live in a house. A web would be very impractical and would cost a lot for heating, but still, let me know what you'd like to see covered more in the future on the channel down below, as well as your favourite person who died. comic book related, not personal, because that again would be a bit weird. But yes, thank you again. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!